Hi, everyone. This is David Cassidy, and it's a joy to welcome you to the first of what we hope will be many gospel conversations with the Alliance for Mission and Renewal. And with me today is David Richter, who leads a church in East Nashville, and David Strain, who leads First Presbyterian Church in Jackson, Mississippi. Guys, I'm going to ask you to take a minute to introduce yourselves. Let me start with David Strain, and then we'll go to David Richter and just talk a little bit about your ministry, what's going on, and then we'll take things from there.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm really glad to be with you both. As you say, I'm the pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm from Scotland originally, as you can probably tell. 10 years here at First Pres now, just finished our sabbatical, and much needed, very grateful for it, but very glad to be back in ministry here. This is my favorite place in the world to preach the gospel. I love this congregation and these dear people. And so that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, terrific.
My name is David Richter, as has already been said. I'm the pastor of City Church of East Nashville, and I've been here for 2 years. Before that, I was a church planter in Boston, Massachusetts for 10 years. And before that, I was doing a lot of things, worked for Liberty, was in Scotland for a little while. I actually think that, David, you and I met the first time at General Assembly at the Free Church. So when you were a pastor in London, I thought about that. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he mentioned that he thought it was there. So I didn't remember that at the time, but I think that may be true. So that's great. So, but anyway, East Nashville, Tennessee. My wife Kelly, have 2 kids, Sam and Lucy. So enjoying the time here. Really love Tennessee. Not particularly this much this time of year, but hopefully it's going to get really nice very soon.
So, David Cassidy, I'm the pastor at Spanish River Church in Boca Raton, Florida, and like the other 2 Davids, had the great privilege of calling the United Kingdom home. Lived there for 10 years, but it was ages ago. So that was 1979 forward into the late 80s before coming back to the U.S. Wow. So, and that wasn't, of course, in the glories of Scotland either. That was Oxford and London, which were very nice. But I'll take South Florida and my palm trees. I think that's just fine. And delighted to be part of the conversation. What got this all going, of course, is the Overture, which is now before presbyteries in the Presbyterian Church in America, Overture 23. And that was penned originally by David Strain. By the way, it's going to get really wild with 3 Davids on this, right? I don't know if it's a pub or a law firm. I'm not sure. The 3 Davids, but it could be
David and David. Yeah,
it could be very fun. So, David, why don't we just start there? Talk a little bit about the thought process, the impulse behind crafting that overture to begin with for its arrival at General Assembly earlier this year.
Yeah, thanks. Overtures they're messy things, right? And they rarely land first time in the form in which the denomination embraces them. And sometimes they take years of denominational reflection and debate and discussion to find language that actually works.
Yeah.
We have been talking about the content of this overture in some form or another for actually quite a number of years. There's now at least one overture that has made it into our book that has come out of that discussion already. And this was an attempt to address concerns from different sides of the church, from friends, from different perspectives that I was talking with. On the one hand, some were saying, we still feel the need to press for real clarity about how ministers and elders and deacons should think and speak of themselves and their sexuality in light of biblical standards. And we think that it would be helpful for us as a denomination to articulate those things in so many words. So that's one set of concerns. There was another set of concerns saying, we hear that drive toward clarity, but we keep hearing vocabulary being used in there that is ill-defined or undefined, that may cause more trouble than it's worth. As we press for clarity, let's actually make sure that it brings clarity and doesn't create more confusion. And so trying to listen to the feedback from previous attempts at this. I've been involved, as have both of you, in overtures committees and in discussions around the deliberative process at General Assembly and before and after General Assembly, in attempting to find a path forward that everyone can buy into, that will bring both clarity and unity. This was an attempt to take a stab at that, and by God's grace, so far so good. I'm encouraged by the kind of consensus that I'm seeing around this, and it's my hope. I really was hoping to save the PCA from endless rounds of the same discussion in the same terms, which only generates frustration and means that sometimes we end up taking our eye off the bigger goal, which is bringing the gospel to the ends of the earth.
David, what David Richter? I'm going to have to clarify. So David Richter, when you think about all the implications of conversations we're having with people about whether or not this is necessary in the light of past overtures, one, as David Strain mentioned, is already on the books. When we're thinking about that, having conversations with guys, what sort of pushback are we getting there about whether something's needed right now?
I think it's a legitimate question to say, like, what are the concerns that are rising up from different wings of the church and different individuals within the church, and I think we need to take those concerns seriously, and we need to learn how to listen to one another better and try to actually hear what the kind of the nub of the concern is. I think as the three of us have talked in the past, and others, and I've talked to other people, I think getting to the nub of it is a difficult thing sometimes. And I think on one side, there are a number of things and factors that I think that play into that. I mean, we all know that we are living through a very interesting time culturally, where we're all feeling the pressure of a shifting cultural norms, shifting kind of perspectives on human sexuality, shifting degrees of intensity in the critiques that are coming from the outside about what this issue is about. And I think that it is a legitimate thing to say, are we being clear? Are our internal documents and standards clear about what we actually believe that the scriptures say? That is incredibly important, and has been important for centuries. It's why we write creeds. It's why we write confessions of faith. And so these are incredibly important things to do. It is another concern on the other side to ask the question, are our standards sufficiently clear? And are we engaging in debate around things because of fear, or because we're concerned about what's going on outside us, and we're just not communicating that well? I think in some ways it seems like the two sides of the debate that have been going on. And I think the process has been difficult at times, but I think I agree with David that, I think that we are moving toward more clarity, but also more unity on this. I do. And one of my questions, and I think the questions that I get a lot, and I'd love actually to hear from you guys about this, is, we have been through several rounds, and we had two overtures that passed through and ended up being passed last year, and the a lot of the conversation around that was that was going to be the clarity that we needed. And then this year we got 23, and I think that there are more concerns and more questions that are coming up. And so I think some of the questions that I'm getting, or the concerns that I'm getting, is, when is this going to end? As David said, is this going to be an endless kind of, writing of overtures that we're kind of going through? Or where are we missing each other, and where are we missing each other about where the clarity actually lies that we need? Because, I think, I hear a lot of actually unity being built around Overture 23 right now this year that passes through, but there is concern that, like, is this going to be it? Not obviously not in the conversation or the end of our, need to engage an increasingly hostile culture around these issues, but when how much more do we need to clarify the things that we have in our documents, and where are we missing each other in the conversation? And then that's an interesting question to me, like, where are we missing that conversation? I'd love to hear from both of you, and how did we get here? How do you think that we've been missing each other in this conversation? So.
Yeah, I loved where David Strain ended with the note about getting back to the business of gospel proclamation, getting that to the ends of the earth, and because that is the work of the church, and we want to be about that. It seems to me that there's this dual impulse, and I want to honor both impulses. I think they're both very biblical impulses, one to proclaim the gospel and the other to guard it, to preserve it. So proclamation, preservation. So Paul writing to Timothy saying, guard the gospel in 2 Timothy 1 and 2, the things that you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also, and so on. But also gospel proclamation, so that, it's preach the word, be faithful in season and out, and so on. Both of those are there. And I think probably where we, at least in many cases, I don't want to say absolutely, but in many cases, there's probably a stronger concern about one of those two particular emphases, perhaps more stridently concerned about the purity and the preservation of the gospel, and the other, the proclamation of the gospel, the going out into the world with mission, making sure we're engaging with the world. And not all of the debates which have taken place have aided us, in my view, in helping on either front, but in particular, shepherding people and caring for them, members of the church. And it's one of the reasons some of the intensity, some of the combativeness over the last few years has led to great dismay and discouragement in many quarters. And so in one pastor I talked to recently, I don't think we can stay in the PCA, not over any doctrinal differences, but because the culture of it is so combative. So I do think it's important that if we're going to address these issues, and we do think we have unity on this, and of course there's a particular focus of this overture which has to do with officers. It's not about some general thing. There may be implications beyond that, because we obviously want officers to be examples, but this particular focus with requirements of our officers in the church, that having spoken to that with clarity, we can move forward. I just think both of those impulses are critical to honor. And I think we probably, in many cases, have a sense that one of those two lies more strongly in hearts than others, depending on maybe some of our calling. I don't know. David Strain, you have any thoughts on that?
I largely agree. I think that it depends sometimes on the issue. And it sometimes surprises me to see who lands where. That's not always as predictable as at first may appear.
Yeah.
And so depending on the issue, so I've observed over the years in my time in the PCA, that when the General Assembly perceives something to be a gospel issue, when it perceives an issue to strike at the nature of the gospel, or directly flows as an implication of what it means to follow Jesus, the denomination generally lands in the right place. Nearly every.
Yes, no doubt.
In our study committees,
Yep.
and in our deliberative decision making. Sometimes it takes a few swings to get there, and as you say, it can get messy. It's sometimes even a little ugly along the way. And in a denomination our size, you're always going to have a variety of temperaments, some of which are more combative than others. And that can give us a bit of a false read on the mood of the denomination. That I'm not always convinced that the General Assembly, the tone of a particular debate, is reflective of the mood of the PCA as a whole. And so I offer that as cautions. I think it's sometimes really easy for us as teaching elders in particular, who are very concerned and very engaged in the courts of the church, especially in things like the Overtures Committee and the deliberative processes. It's really easy for us to sort of read the PCA through that lens, and that can get really discouraging. And it can lead us into a really combative stance, a sort of them and us stance. And I agree that mission and message are equally ultimate things. What's the use of having clarity on the message if you don't share it with anyone?
Right.
What's the use of being all about reaching the world if you've lost the message that will save the world?
That's right.
Right. So these are equally ultimate, must be held together.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's right to sort of polarize the denomination, say these are the message guys and those are the mission guys.
Yeah.
I think sometimes that has to do more with the particular point under discussion than it does with two camps. My own view is that our theological standards, the Westminster Standards, express the central stream of what it means to be a Presbyterian Christian. They're not on the right or the left. The Westminster Standards is, in my judgment, biblical Christianity most fully expressed. And to really grasp that ought to lead us to deep convictions wedded to an Irenic spirit, a desire to stand together with all those who share like precious faith with us without wavering on our commitments. And I do think that part of the broader landscape of discussion in our culture right now has bled into the church so that there can be a real polarization, a lack of listening, a great deal of heat, not always a great deal of light. Now, I do think that there are, in a number of places, substantive differences of opinion, both about the message and about the mission.
No question. In terms of methodology and no question.
What needs to be emphasized, and how best to get the word out.
Yeah.
And those are real differences, but often we're talking past each other, fighting about what we assume each other is saying, rather than having genuine discussion about those real differences. We have so much that we share, but you wouldn't always know it, especially if you tune into the debates at General Assembly. And
well, that's actually a factor, is tuning into the debates. I mean, now with internet access and live streaming everything, and the way social media works, everybody's in on some of how the sausage is made.
Right.
And that overflows into the way in which discussions take place on a wider basis. There's also, and David Richter was talking about this a little bit, what's fueled some of this. I think sometimes there are expectations that these things can be easily resolved, quickly resolved. Historically, the church has never been in a huge hurry, not just the PCA, on major doctrinal and theological issues going all the way back. It's taken on many occasions, decades, even centuries, to reach unity on points. So we do have a kind of age in which we expect instantaneous results, and then there's pressure within the media, especially on leaders, to go down a certain path, take a certain stand, et cetera, et cetera. And that can't actually be helpful to the way in which we can work together, right?
One of the most helpful things my dad ever said to me, I remember sitting on the floor of General Assembly with him when I was in high school, I think. And he said, and I remember, somebody getting really angry at the microphone and asking what that was about. And he said, he said, almost nothing we do can't be changed next year. And, you know, there's just he wasn't saying that the debates weren't important. He was saying that we need to trust the process, and it's a long view in how to do that. And I think that's just right. I mean, you know, the idea that, um, you know, and I also think that it, it's just a struggle right now because we are becoming more polarized. There are things that are said on the floor of General Assembly that can be very polarizing. And so the question is, how do we deal with that? You know, I read an article, I think it was in the Atlantic this week, about, you know, how so many people are throwing temper tantrums in national parks right now. And just there's just a lack of civility anytime you watch the news or anything else. And unfortunately, there's just a lot. Some of that is leaking into the church, as David Strain said a minute ago. And I do think the question of what it means to be reminded of not only the gospel and the importance of both the mission of it and the clarity of it, or the foundational truth of it, but also in how the Lord calls us to engage with one another over these things, and to lovingly care, and actually to listen to one another, which is something that we are just losing as a culture. Any ability to actually listen to what the other person is saying, and to be able to engage well and argue well in the midst of that. And um, you know, I've been in debates at General Assembly where I felt like that has actually gone well, and as a source of encouragement, like, you know, I do think the last 2 years in our Overtures Committee, it hasn't been quite as much on the floor, unfortunately, but in the Overtures Committee, I felt like there's been actually a lot of listening to one another, and a lot of helpful engagement, helpful dialogue around some of these issues. And so I'm not utterly despairing over these things. I know people that are. Um, but, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me is, and I'd love to hear your guys' thought on this, is like, you know, because I'm not sure what to do about it, is, you know, I heard somebody say one time, like, I wish we could just cut the live feed. And the reason for that is not because we want to just hide everything from the public, right? That's not, is not kind of trying to be secretive about it. But it is
You're
like,
saying you're not saying we should go into a conclave.
no, and you know, but at the same time, like, you have to understand what General Assembly is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we are coming together as a court to argue about particular issues, and these are important issues. And as you're discussing these things on the floor, you may get somebody stand up on the floor and say something that none of us would agree
Oh
with,
man.
or the vast majority of the church would agree with, but that may be the, you know, the thing that gets out and is
Yeah.
kind of most reported about. And that's an important thing to think about. Like, I do think we have to trust the process. I think bringing the level of civility, you know, back to a more godly level of how we engage and listen to one another, but also understanding and educating our churches more about like what we're doing and what it means when we have these debates. And that it, you know, because there's a small minority of people that are arguing on an extreme on either side, doesn't mean that that's where the majority of the church actually lands on this. And I think it's important to know that in the process of this, or that this could take years to get to a good point. So, yeah.
It could. David, when you're having conversations with pastors around the country or other elders, where are the points of pushback on the overture? I've already written in support of it, but what are
You're gonna have to say R, S, and C.
Or Big
Yeah.
David and Little David, I'll let you choose who's who.
Yeah, there you go.
David Strain. David Strain, as the primary author mover, what are you hearing in terms of pushback? Going, I don't know that that's adequate. I'm not sure this is going to get the job done. Is there any of that from guys as you're talking to? Where and what in what way?
I think some guys who are very concerned to be as tight and as precise as possible, who are very conservative, and very concerned, even alarmed. They would read the overture. Can I just read the line that we inserted?
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
So Overture 23 inserted a line into BCO 8.2 and into 9.3, which is about qualifications for elder and qualifications for deacon. And it inserts into those paragraphs, he should conform to the biblical requirement of chastity and sexual purity in his descriptions of himself, his convictions, character, and conduct. And they would say, the guys that are pushing back against this from a position of alarm that the church is becoming too broad, too loose on the question of sexuality. They would say This doesn't name specifically homosexuality. It doesn't go after the question of identity, those sorts of things. Guys on the other side of that discussion who think that we're already plenty clear and that a lot of this is driven by panic, and that panic is fundamentally a distraction from our mission. Really feel like this is superfluous vocabulary, that it's a waste of airtime, that it's a distraction from our core work, that it all is doing is fueling the debate rather than ending it. Those are the sorts of language that I'm hearing from both sides of this. But my read, like, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? And so there's always going to be people who are not pleased.
Sure.
And there's
Really?
often a degree of validity in many sides of these concerns. But we were just talking off the air about the way overtures happen and what an overture really is. These things, as you pointed out earlier, this is the sausage making business. And that is messy.
Yeah.
And it's an overture is, there's a certain level of pragmatic, what can we do? Not what ought it to be in the best of all possible worlds. And sometimes my brothers who are well to my right or well to my left on any given issue are idealists. I think I'm an idealist in a good way. I cling to biblical ideals, I hope. And I hope those discipline my pragmatism. But disciplined pragmatism is good. And trying to find consensus around shared convictions is the right approach. And that's what we're trying to do in this overture. It seems to me that the ad interim study committee report on human sexuality really helpfully clarified an awful lot, gave good categories, settled some discussions, helped form the way that we speak about this issue in very biblical, very faithful, and very pastoral ways. The committee served the denomination really well. And while there is still debate and disagreement in some segments of the church on both extremes about this, the majority of our denomination stands right there and has clarity about that, I think. The question has been, do we need to put things in our book that reflects that clarity? And my hope is that together with the two overtures that we passed from the previous assembly, this will get us there in a way that allows us to move on to other issues. And to your point earlier, I know I'm talking too much, so forgive me. Three preachers in the
It's that
room.
beautiful Scottish accent. You just gonna put me to sleep.
We're
Fine,
To the point about slowness, there is a blessed, sacred slowness, especially to Presbyterianism. It is a deliberative thing. It takes our church years, even when we are agreed in one assembly. It still takes us till the following year to finally ratify a decision. And more often than not, that overture that goes through that process and meets the standard of presbytery approval and then gets ratified by the following assembly has had previous iterations in a couple of assemblies before that got shot down. And the framers of those overtures have typically listened to the reasoning and gone back and tried to take that pushback on board and to find a way that allows them still to hit the target they were originally aiming at, but acknowledges the valid criticisms and concerns that they've heard. And I think that while along the way, sometimes ugly things get said and people's temper gets frayed and all of that, you put 2,000 people in a room and ask them to debate, that's going to happen on almost any given issue. It just is. Yep. But that accepted, that process to me is really a beautiful thing. And I'm actually really optimistic about the PCA. Because on the one hand, I've seen us express remarkable clarity about our core convictions. And I do not see the evidence of the alleged precipitous decline into liberalism that I'm hearing from some. And at the same time, I'm also seeing churches get planted and ministry get done and people being bold and sacrificial and courageous to preach Christ all across our nation and all around the world. And I don't see the PCA losing momentum in trying to fulfill its mission. I think it's easy to think that we are because we may come out of a particular assembly, limping a little and frustrated over any particular matter that we wished went differently. But I think, as David Richter said a minute ago, let's take the long view. And looked at over, 10 years, 20 years, over our 50 years, I think we see the hand of God at work, and we see him continuing to work for the health and the blessing of our people and for the glory of his name in ways that I think are frankly thrilling. I'm not at all pessimistic about our denominational direction.
It's worth pointing out, I think, too, that like anybody who remembers when we used to do overtures on the floor of the assembly in front of everybody.
Oh man,
and we used to do the judicial stuff on the floor. I mean, it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. I do think that the process is actually working better now.
And we're more deliberative now because our overtures committee is fully representative of our presbyteries.
Yeah.
And there's parity between teaching and ruling elders. There are different rules in our debate. So it's just a manageable, frank, full, real deliberative debate in overtures that, as you say, David, has gone actually very well. There's a lot of hard work done, listening, trying to understand, finding consensus amendments that can pass. That work has been wonderful and very encouraging to see.
I completely share your optimism, by the way, David, about the next 50 years.
You know how much it costs me to be this optimistic as a Scotsman?
I know. That's so
painful.
Very difficult. I know. And one of the reasons I want to say that is because of what you just said, which I think is incredibly important, that you don't, buy into the kind of, much vaunted and much advertised line that the PCA is drifting into some kind of theological liberalism. I just don't see that happening.
Right.
It's theologically conservative and biblically conservative. I think there are fears that are unfounded in that approach that says that we're headed that direction. I just don't think it's true. And that isn't to say that there isn't someone somewhere or some church somewhere that wouldn't be moving that direction. But the truth is, as a whole, as a denomination, that's just not where we're at. And by the way, that unity that we expressed in the vote on the reception of the ad interim committee's report demonstrates that actually not just unity, but conservative approach to the issue. I was very, very grateful for that. And it's the basis of some work we're doing pastorally with our congregation starting in September, later this month, over a 7-week series on Wednesday nights. We're really using that as the basis of some teaching that we're doing. And I know many churches are doing that. So I'm very, very grateful for those efforts. And I think it highlights when we do get together on these things and work through stuff, we're not going to make everybody happy. That's to be sure. But we will arrive at places of I think, better understanding, greater clarity. I think when we do disagree, actually, we help each other learn. So I'm not opposed to any of the disagreements per se, the spirit of some of them unpleasant, but I think the disagreements actually help us grow in our understanding, grow in our wisdom. I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the glacial pace of some of it. I also understand, and I think you referred to this, why it's necessary for us to see this overture as an opportunity to put some of that now to rest. And why do you think that's possible or important now? If this goes through, presbyteries pass it, we get the 2/3, and it comes back to the assembly. We go, okay, there's that. Do you have good reason for thinking, okay, I think this does it, at least for this season on this issue?
My sense of the PCA right now is that this one issue has been aired so thoroughly that a lot of people across the board are ready to move on.
Yeah.
And feel like we've addressed the matter, and we've come to. I mean, even the vote on 23 at this past assembly was so overwhelming, both in Overture on the floor. That sort of signals to me that mood that okay, we can get together on this, and we're ready as a church to, after having expressed our mind in multiple different ways, the Nashville Statement, the Ad Interim Committee report, previous overtures that are now in our book, this overture, debates that have been had, seminars at General Assembly, not to mention all the many discussions in churches, on podcasts and blogs, and all the other places. We've been talking about almost nothing else for, how long has it been? 5 years? Is it more than
At
5
least,
years?
at least
a long time.
I would say 8
Long
years,
time.
eight
Yeah.
to 9 years. Yeah.
A long time. And, some people are leaving the PCA because they're not satisfied. Others, actually on both extremes.
Right.
They want the PCA to be much, much narrower or much less vocal on the issue, and don't feel safe or don't feel aligned theologically any longer. But those are not vast numbers. The bulk of our denomination, I think, is clear on the matter and ready to move on. That's not to say that there won't be other debates. There inevitably will.
Of course.
And many of those will be necessary and good.
Yeah, sure.
Or that there won't be another overtures, because
Right.
literally every individual person could take
could write an overture. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But my instinct, if I was a betting man, it would be that another overture really won't have a lot of legs at a following General Assembly if it's on this specific issue.
Yeah.
It's just that's my sense of the mood. I may be totally wrong about that, but that's my sense.
Yeah.
And it's worth saying that just because there's an overture on something does not mean that the denomination has any appetite for actually dealing with that, or that that's not representative. I mean, we get overtures all the time that can be pretty far out there, right, on different things. And so, if we get an overture this next year on something like this, we need to wait and see how the denomination responds. It doesn't mean that we're going to continue this on. I think that's worth saying.
Right.
I'd love to ask one question as we're kind of concluding. Like, what do you guys think that we can learn from the past 8 years of our debates on this to be more godly and to be more faithful, to approach this in a better way going forward?
Mm-hmm.
That's such a great question, David.
That's a good question.
I think the first thing I would note is patient listening. The real posture of heart that says, I'm trying to hear what your concern is, rather than simply arguing for my position. As convinced as I may be about my position, I want to be able to deeply hear not just the position of the other person, but the concern of the other person, to enter into that in some way, to try to grasp what's moving that. I think that's one of the most important things we have to do. That doesn't mean that I have to affirm that concern. I may come to the conclusion that I think that concern is invalid, it's misplaced, it's overwrought, it's overemphasized, but I still need to understand it. And I think sometimes we're, for myself, too quick to come to the defense of my position and the implications of what I believe would go against it, rather than really listening to what someone else is concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I can. I agree with every word you just said there, David. I slow to speak, quick to listen. I think we all can acknowledge that we've not always done that well. We need to seek each other's forgiveness and pardon. We need to pursue each other. I think the idea that we have enemies in our denomination is really disturbing to me.
And there are people who speak that way.
They definitely do. I do not have any enemies,
right,
to my knowledge. People may view me that way. I don't have any enemies. I have opponents on all kinds of issues,
sure,
who are on the other side of an issue. And we're going to debate, and we're going to wrangle. We're going to get frustrated even, and we're going to differ. But they are my brothers in Christ. They are not my enemy. And that needs to constantly discipline my attitude in the way that I carry myself, in the speech that I use, in the words that I say in my head that don't even come out of my mouth. What I say in here about you matters as much as what I say out of my mouth toward you or in the presence of others about you. And that what we're talking about now is sanctification. It's being humble. It's trying to be patient with one another because we belong to the same Savior. And ultimately, we are dishonoring the cross, the work of Christ, when we think the worst of one another and leap to conclusions.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating for peace when there is no peace. And I don't think you are either. I think
no, I don't think either of us are in any danger.
Right. Yeah. and we need to be able, and we need each other to challenge and help us see what we're missing. And we need to be calling each other out, and that's godly and right.
Yes.
There are debates that have to be had that are important for the health of the church and the furtherance of the gospel. But how we have them really, really matters. It really, really matters. So I'm very grateful for you both and for the opportunity to have these sorts of conversations together, to do them publicly, to try and imperfectly model some of that.
Oh, it's a joy. David, thank you for taking the time on that and
Absolutely.
sharing so much.
This has been great. Thank you guys so much. It's been wonderful to be with you and have a little conversation about this.